A narrow iron gate sits under a slab of pale limestone, cool with cave damp, hidden below the sacred rock at the heart of Jerusalem. The metal is blackened from age. The stone above it is worn smooth where hands, dust, and candle smoke have passed for centuries. By the 4th century, the book tied to this place had already been pushed out. The Synod of Laodicea, around 363 to 364 CE, helped narrow what churches would publicly read. Enoch was not carried forward with the books that won that fight. The reason was simple. It spoke too freely about hidden chambers, watchers, judgment, and the architecture of heaven. Then the fragments turned up, not in rumor, in caves. In the Judean desert, the Dead Sea Scroll finds brought pieces of Enoch back into the light, including Aramaic copies from Qumran that showed the text was older, wider, and more respected than later gatekeepers wanted to admit. For readers who thought Enoch had always been marginal, that discovery changed the scale of the problem immediately. The central claim is this: the Enochic tradition preserves the memory of a sealed chamber beneath sacred stone, and the entrance to that place is still guarded. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text says, what evidence shows, and why it was hidden. If buried sacred architecture fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from scripture and records. But here's what makes this stranger. The site most often connected to the claim is not a ruined hill in the open desert. It is one of the most contested sacred locations on earth. Beneath the great exposed rock inside the dome of the rock is a small cave-like chamber, known for centuries in Arabic as the Well of Souls. You enter by descending a few steps cut into stone. The space is low, enclosed, marked by devotion and restriction at the same time. That alone does not prove anything, but Enoch does not describe sacred ground as flat and symbolic. Again and again, it describes measured places, openings, foundations, hollowed spaces, pillars, and thresholds where heaven and earth touch in dangerous proximity. That is why the discovery trail matters. In Cave 4 at Qumran, multiple Enoch fragments were catalogued under numbers like 4Q201, 4Q202, 4Q204, and related pieces published in the 20th century. Joseph T. Millick's 1976 edition of the Aramaic Enoch material forced scholars to stop pretending this was a late fringe text. Michael Knibb's English translation in 1978 opened the evidence to a wider public. George Nicholsberg and later Lawrence Stukenbrook pressed the case that Enochic material belonged to the central world of early Jewish thought, not its margins. When a text survives in multiple Aramaic manuscripts, across separate fragments, with stable thematic structure, you are no longer dealing with a devotional curiosity. You are dealing with a serious archive. And this is where it gets disturbing, because the chamber language does not appear once and vanish. It accumulates. In the Book of the Watchers, Enoch is taken to built environments that are described like places someone expected you to picture: walls, openings, columns, crystal surfaces, fire within structure. In the dream visions and astronomical materials, the cosmos is not abstract. It is arranged, sectioned, governed by doors, storehouses, and fixed stations. That matters, because ancient readers who thought space was ordered this way also built ritual landscapes on Earth to mirror it. What we're looking at breaks into 4 parts. Part 1 is the descent language. In 1 Enoch 14, the visionary does not drift into a cloud of meaning. He approaches a house, then another greater house beyond it, with thresholds, floors, and an interior so severe it is almost unbearable to stand within. The emphasis is architectural, not vague, not poetic overflow, a sequence of spaces. Part 2 is the sealed earth language. In 1 Enoch 18, and again in connected judgment passages, certain places in the earth are shown as cavities prepared for confinement, regions set apart until an appointed time. These are not open fields. They are enclosed locations under authority. The text keeps returning to the idea that the earth contains hidden compartments, some for storing, some for binding, some for witness. Part 3 is the stone and foundation pattern. In 1 Enoch 24 through 26, the visionary reaches a mountain zone centered on extraordinary stone and a place of holiness associated with future judgment and chosen ground. The details are debated, but the pattern is clear. Sacred elevation, notable stone, restricted approach, future function. Later Jewish and Christian readers repeatedly mapped such passages onto Jerusalem because Jerusalem already concentrated temple, stone, and divine presence in one place. Part 4 is the guarding function. In 1 Enoch 60 and across related materials, cosmic order is kept by appointed beings, set limits, and named boundaries. Access is controlled. The message is flat and consistent. Holy thresholds are not public. They are supervised. Now set that beside the actual topography of the sacred rock. The exposed stone inside the dome of the rock is not just a marker on a platform. It contains natural contours, cut features debated by scholars, and below it, a real chamber with a restricted entrance. Medieval observers described the space. Pilgrims recorded it. Custodians regulated access. Whatever one thinks the chamber originally was, it has never behaved like an ordinary basement. It behaved like a threshold. There is another reason the Enoch connection refuses to die. The Enochic world was already tied to temple thinking before later authorities pushed it aside. The Epistle of Jude quotes Enoch directly. Early Christian writers knew the material. Tertullian defended it. At Qumran, the text was not preserved as an oddity buried under unrelated debris. It circulated among communities intensely concerned with purity, priesthood, cosmic order, and the proper arrangement of sacred time. James Vanderkam spent years showing how deeply Enochic thought shaped Jewish apocalyptic expectation. Rachel Elior argued that priestly and visionary traditions preserved memories of ordered heavenly worship that were mirrored below. You do not have to accept every reconstruction to see the core point. Enoch belongs to a temple-shaped imagination. Once you understand that, the chamber details stop floating in isolation. They drop into a network of ideas already built around stone, ascent, descent, gates, and guarded knowledge. The Jerusalem temple tradition spoke in layers: outer courts, inner courts, holy place, holy of holies. Access tightened with each step inward. The sacred rock beneath the dome of the rock sits within the inherited gravity of that entire landscape. A chamber under such a stone is never just a chamber. It is automatically read as interior to an interior. That reading is older than modern speculation. Medieval descriptions of the rock and the cave beneath it did not treat the lower space as trivial. Writers noted the steps, the hollowed area, the confined atmosphere, the relation between the upper stone and the lower opening. Later guidebooks repeated the same basic impression: something below, something set apart, something not fully given over to casual inspection. The language changes with century and community, but the habit of guarded attention remains, and the manuscript evidence keeps pushing in the same direction. Fragment 4Q201 preserves portions of the Book of the Watchers. 4Q202 carries more of that material. 4Q204 overlaps additional sections. Other fragments contribute to the broader Enochic collection, including the Book of Dreams and the Astronomical Book. This matters because the chamber claim is not hanging on one late Ethiopic line copied in isolation. The underlying Enochic architecture is older than the medieval manuscripts that preserved the full text. That is what the Qumran evidence changed forever. It gave the tradition a pre-Christian material base. Scholars noticed something else once the fragments were studied more closely. Enochic literature is obsessed with controlled revelation. Knowledge is shown to a chosen figure, often in stages, often by escort, often with explicit limits on who can endure the sight. That pattern is not decorative. It sounds like initiation through zones, a guided approach through ordered spaces. Again, not proof of one exact underground room in Jerusalem, but it is the same logic a restricted chamber performs physically. Limited access, sequential entry, meaning revealed by passage, not by distance. There is even a topographical reason later readers kept circling back to the sacred stone. The summit traditionally identified with the temple is not featureless. It is defined by elevation, exposed bedrock, and accumulated reverence from Jewish, Christian, and Islamic memory. If a visionary text preserved the idea of a place where stone, holiness, judgment, and restricted entry meet, later interpreters would naturally look there first, not because they were careless, but because almost no other place in the region gathers those elements so tightly into one physical point. The modern parallel comes from geophysical work and cognitive archaeology. In 2019, a team at Tel Aviv University working on ritual space and human response to constrained environments drew attention to how low, resonant chambers intensify memory, authority, and perceived encounter. Around the same period, environmental psychologist Colin Ellard and researchers working on sacred architecture showed that compressed passages and dim enclosed volumes alter bodily attention in measurable ways. That does not prove Enoch was reporting a physical room under one specific stone. But it does show something important. Cultures repeatedly use enclosed stone chambers to stage contact with what they consider otherworldly, and the Enochic descriptions fit that pattern with unsettling precision. Here's what the translators left out. In several standard English versions, the force of the spatial terms is softened. Words that carry the sense of house, enclosure, or built place are often rendered so generally that readers hear only atmosphere, not structure. In the Ethiopic tradition, and in comparison with the Aramaic fragments, the movement is more concrete. Enoch is brought into places, not merely visions of places. That matters because once the language becomes architectural, the chamber reading stops sounding like fantasy imposed from the outside. It starts sounding like memory preserved through sacred description. And there is one phrase that changes the texture of the whole thing. In discussions of 1 Enoch 14, readers often focus on the fiery house, but not on the sequencing. First one structure, then another beyond it, a progression inward, outer zone, inner zone, approach under control. When translators flatten that into a single, generalized heavenly scene, they remove the logic of entry. They remove the corridor. The suppression starts at the Synod of Laodicea, around 363 to 364 CE. From there, the pattern hardens. Athanasius, in his Festal letter of 367, fixed attention on a narrower reading list. Jerome, writing at the end of the 4th century and into the early 5th, treated books outside the Hebrew canon with suspicion, even when he knew they were ancient. Augustine helped make caution into policy by insisting that disputed works could not carry the same authority as the books publicly received. By the 6th century, The Gelasian decree circulated lists that pushed apocryphal material even further from acceptable reading. Meanwhile, the Ethiopian tradition preserved Enoch, which is exactly what you would expect if suppression was strong in some centers and weaker in others. The text did not disappear because it lacked value. It disappeared where authorities chose not to copy it, cite it, or teach it. And once a text falls out of liturgy, its geography falls with it. That is the part many people miss. If Enoch preserves a memory attached to sacred stone and hidden entry, then removing Enoch from normal reading does more than silence a book. It severs a map. Later pilgrims still see the rock. They still see the chamber. But the interpretive key is gone. Now, here's where it gets active. In the last several years, public arguments over research access on the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, have made one fact impossible to ignore. Independent archaeological work at the summit remains extraordinarily restricted. In 2020 and 2021, debates over maintenance, documentation, and oversight again exposed the same tension that has defined the place for generations. Custodianship, sovereignty, and security all collide there. Outside teams do not simply walk in, open a trench, and test subsurface claims. They cannot. That means any chamber tradition linked to the sacred stone sits inside one of the least freely examinable ritual landscapes on earth. For believers in suppression, that looks current, not ancient. There is also the matter of selective visibility. Visitors are shown the monumental surface. They are given the platform, the dome, the great public image. What they are not given is routine scholarly access to every hollow, seam, cut, and cavity under controlled modern study. Even when reports describe features, they do so inside layers of religious sensitivity and political risk. The result is not total secrecy. It is something more durable. Partial knowledge, enough to keep interest alive, never enough to settle the argument. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying a supernatural machine is physically operating under the Temple Mount today. But what the text describes, when you look at it carefully, matches a remembered sacred architecture of descent, restricted entry, layered holiness, and guarded access better than it matches a loose cloud of religious symbolism. And when a real chamber sits beneath the most charged sacred stone in Jerusalem, the comparison stops being casual. You also have to account for the persistence of the pattern across time. Second Temple literature imagines reality in levels. Temple practice divided access in levels. Sacred mountains, holy courts, inner rooms, and underground spaces all operate by separation. The Enochic material fits that world exactly. It does not speak like a late writer making things up at random. It speaks like someone working within a known system of holy geography, where certain thresholds are entered, not invented. This is why the buried chamber claim does not depend on one verse. It depends on convergence, textual convergence, topographical convergence, ritual convergence, suppression convergence. A text, preserved in Aramaic fragments, describes enclosed sacred approaches and hidden earth spaces. Jerusalem preserves a sacred stone with a chamber beneath it. Historical authorities reduce the circulation of the text that best preserves that kind of spatial imagination. Modern conditions prevent decisive, open examination of the most sensitive location involved. None of those facts alone is enough. Together, they stop being easy to dismiss. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If a text from the Enochic tradition repeatedly describes sacred architecture as layered, bounded, and entered in sequence, then its authors were preserving spatial ideas, not just religious feelings. If one of the oldest and most contested sacred stones in the region sits over a real enclosed chamber with controlled access, then later readers were right to connect stone, threshold, and hidden depth. If the book carrying those descriptions was gradually excluded by influential authorities while surviving on the edges of the canon, then loss of status can explain loss of interpretation. If the site most closely associated with the pattern remains difficult to examine openly even now, then uncertainty is not evidence against the chamber tradition. It may be the condition that kept it alive. That does not force every detail into place. It does force the question back onto the table. Was Enoch describing a symbolic cosmos only? Or was symbolic language preserving memory of real sacred architecture, anchored to a place later generations could still point to, touch, guard, and fear? The longer you sit with the evidence, the less absurd the second option sounds, because ancient writers did not separate heaven and earth the way modern readers often do. They mirrored one with the other. A chamber below could reflect a chamber above. A stone could mark more than surface. A guarded entrance could be theological and physical at the same time. In that world, a text like Enoch does not need to hand you a street address to preserve a location. It only needs to preserve the pattern strongly enough that the location becomes visible once you stand near it. And under the sacred rock in Jerusalem, the pattern is visible. A descent, a low chamber, a controlled entrance, a tradition of reverence and warning, a text that kept talking about hidden places in the earth long after authorities tried to narrow what counted as safe reading. And that is why the chamber matters. Not because it lets modern people indulge in fantasy, but because it may preserve the last physical echo of a scriptural geography that official history learned to flatten. Once you see the stone, the stair, the enclosure, and the guarded mouth together, the old text stops sounding distant. It starts sounding local. That narrow iron gate still sits under that slab of pale limestone, cool with cave damp, hidden below the sacred rock at the heart of Jerusalem. It is still there, still waiting, still holding its dark mouth beneath the stone, exactly the way the old Enochic world said a threshold should.